We're coming down to the stretch run of the season. We've got 6 games for the Vikings left to play, and they're still very much in reach of the 1 seed. So let's talk about what exactly they need to do to make that happen here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. This show can be found anywhere you listen to your favorite shows, but you can also find it on Amazon Fire and Roku, which is pretty cool. If you have a Fire Stick or Roku, just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is presented to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 of your favorite players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, and if you're right, you can win up to 10 times your money. First-time users receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. So we've had a little bit of time to digest the Thursday Night Patriots game. I will talk about it plenty in terms of film. I'll get into some of the stuff here, talk a lot more Wednesday. I'm sure you guys will have questions. Tomorrow is Twitter Tuesday, so get your mailbag questions in. Again, Locked On Vikings or at Luke Braun NFL on Twitter or lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. Or there's a Google form in the show notes if you have something more long form. That's always welcome. Get your questions in or leave a YouTube comment. I'll read your YouTube comments to this. If you have any questions, leave them there. So I'll get into it a lot in all of those phases. But really, I want to kind of focus on where the Vikings are right now. As I've sat down, the Eagles have just defeated the Packers. And so where we find ourselves within the division is pretty simple. If the Vikings win one game and Detroit loses one game, that's it. The Vikings clinch the division. They also needed the Packers to lose one game. They lost that game against the Eagles. Any one game in the rest of it. So now the Vikings win one more game. They knock the Packers out. One game, one Detroit loss, or 2 Vikings wins. They knock Detroit out and they clinch. Bears-Packers, both very likely to be eliminated by the time that we play them because it's the last 2 games of the year. Pretty likely that the Jets and Giants are like the only 2 teams that we're playing that still have a shot at like contending, right? Or at least are still talking themselves into it. The Lions could still technically sneak into a wild card spot, but they're like 4 games out of it. They'll probably be in miracle, we're still technically alive territory. But the Vikings schedule is markedly easier than the Eagles. That's what I'm getting at here. So getting the number 1 seed, certainly in the cards. Now, the Eagles are really good. So just because they play harder teams doesn't mean I'm saying, well, they'll just go 3-3 through that stretch. Like, I don't know. I think to get the 1 seed, the Vikings probably have to win out. I know that sucks because I don't think they like. It's hard to parlay 6 games in a row together, right? And the year on a 7-game winning streak, but that feels like the only way because if the Eagles go 15-2, that means they went 5-1 down the stretch, and if the Vikings win out, that would mean the Eagles and Vikings are tied. Eagles get the 1 seed. If the Eagles go 15-2 and are 5-1 down the stretch, that you probably were never going to get the 1 seed anyways. But if they can go 4-2 down that stretch, which I think is very doable, they've got 3 divisional games that know the Eagles very well, plus the Titans, who are very much in the race for the AFC. I think you can find 2 losses somewhere in there. Then you can get the 1 seed. But I think that's what it will take. Because if the Vikings do end up dropping a game, they go 14-3, suddenly you're looking for the Eagles to end the season like 500, and that feels like a lot more to ask. But beyond the playoff position aspect of it, and of course the Vikings also have a 2-game lead on the 2 seed, which is important because that 2 seed comes with 2 home games, and that second home game is very important to me when we're talking about a Super Bowl run. I know you got to get past the wild card round to cash in on it, but that also means, the weakest opponent, you're getting Washington or Seattle or somebody, the Falcons are a low-key dark horse, Lions, low-key dark horse. You're getting a team that barely snuck in instead of being the 4 seed and you got to play Dallas at home, right? That's much harder. And when it comes to playoff position as well, and like playoff and Super Bowl odds and all that stuff, if you're the 2 seed, you can't play Philly the divisional round. And looking at Dallas, who most of the models see as a better team than the Vikings, hard to argue, they 40-3'd us. um, then you'll see the Cowboys and Eagles both having higher Super Bowl odds than the Vikings do, which is kind of odd because Dallas will probably have to play on the road unless they take the NFC East. But then that means Philly has to play on the road. So like one of those teams is going to have to be road warriors. And that likely means a trip to Tampa to play Tom Brady at home. And I know Tom Brady ain't the same guy he used to be, but that's still, I mean, that guy's been around in the playoffs, right? So you got to get through that. And then really, like if you look at the way the playoffs would look at if they ended today, the Vikings would play the Commanders, the 49ers would play the Giants, and the Bucks would play Dallas. Now let's say Dallas, 49ers, and the Vikings win. And I think that would probably be what's favored in those games. Dallas travels to Philly. And now one of those two takes each other out. That's what we want, right? If not just the 1 seed as like on the whole, right? So that's the kind of thing that the kind of thing we're rooting for. We want this to work out in such a way where we don't have to beat Dallas and Philly to get to the Super Bowl. It would be nice to only have to go through one of those and the rest of the teams feel like they're a tier below. I want to talk more though about what the Vikings have to do if they're going to win out. How do they become a team that wins out, right? Because none of those games are like impossible to win. Most of them, I think the Vikings might be favored in every game going from here on out. Actually, I would be surprised if they weren't favored if in every game from here on out. So how do you string all of those together? That's what I want to talk about next. And it kind of goes back to some of the things we learned from the Patriots game. But before we get into that, I want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that I'm pretty stoked on. They're called Block Forever, and it's a brand new podcast from former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil, brother of Matt. You may remember him. And Ryan Khalil will sit down with star players, coaches, and former pros across the league to get a little more real about like what happens on Sundays and in locker rooms and all of that stuff, talking about leadership and the players' psyches and how to deal with combative teammates, and some stuff that's a little bit more substantive than what you get on NFL Network or whatever. So catch the full Block Forever series available anywhere you get your favorite podcasts like this one, available everywhere now. Audible, get in the game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. They are talking about all things in the wide world of sports, including but not limited to the goings-on in the NFL. I'm sure Peter will talk a little bit about Aaron Rodgers on that one, as well as World Cup updates, basketball, hockey, all that good stuff. Also, check me out on Patreon if you wouldn't mind. I have all sorts of cool content coming down the pipe from this Patriots game. I did a quick one about the Dallas game. If you want to see what went wrong there, or even go back and relive the Bills game and stuff, go back and relive any of the games. You can find that at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL, film breakdowns, and the occasional odd thought. But speaking of film, I dove into it. All right. And I came away with some things that I think the Vikings can do to kind of take the next step toward being able to rattle off the win streaks that it will take to actually hoist that dang Lombardi. Because if you're not getting the 6-game win streak, and then it would actually have to be a 9-game win streak to get that first seed, that bye, you got to at least win 4 in a row in the playoffs, right? So how do you become that team that really is so difficult to attack or so good at attacking that you can just knock off team after team after team after team? That's what I see the Eagles as right now. That they are so good at so many different things that they can pull out a drive where they're just like a zone run team. And then they can pull out a drive where they're like a quick RPO team. And then they can pull out a drive where they're like a play action shot team. And that's just impossible to defend. So how can the Vikings become that level? Like, how do they find that power level? So obviously, as we come off of the Cowboys and Patriots games, the most problematic unit is the defense, right? Way more problematic than the offense. So let's start there. There are a few things I think the Vikings can do that are mid-season things. I'm not talking about firing the defensive coordinator. I'm not talking about benching players or picking up free agents or anything like that. This isn't about personnel. You can't change your personnel in November and expect that to be like a happy-go-lucky cure-all. You got the guys you got by this point. If you wanted to have other players, you should have dealt with that in May. But what I see right now is, so the Vikings are in zone match a lot, right? That's their bread and butter in terms of coverage. And spacing is the killer of all zone coverages. When there is a completion made in a zone coverage, something is spaced inefficiently, incorrectly, maybe understandably, but in a way that allowed to catch, right? Spacing is the culprit. The biggest example I can give you is like Cam Bynum playing too deep while linebackers play really shallow. And there's this issue when you have somebody like Bynum who wants to play his safety responsibilities really deep. He's doing that to give himself cushion, to give himself time to read the play, because he's not Harrison. Harrison Smith plays 15 yards off the ball, which is really shallow for a safety. Really close to the line of scrimmage, and it doesn't give him a lot of time to break on things, but he doesn't need a lot of time to break on things. He's Harrison Smith. He knows what he's looking at. He's been in the league for 12 years now, 10, 11. Cam Bynum, second year playing safety at all, let alone second year in the pros, because he was a corner in college, still reading things, right? So he's going to play a little deeper. And it's funny, like if you look at when they have the same job, like look at when Harrison Smith is on the half side of a coverage with playing a deep half zone, responsible for a deep half of the field, versus when Bynum is playing that. Harrison Smith plays that deep half responsibility where the coaching point very often is midpoint between routes, stay really high, make sure you stay on top of everything. Harrison Smith ain't playing it that way. He is staying as high as he needs to, but he doesn't need to stay very high. And Cam Bynum does. But when you have a safety that is that deep, you can't have a linebacker, for example, bite on any play action. You can't exactly have them roboting, which is roll over and back, ROB, robot, get it? That's the name for the technique you might see, and you might even mistake sometimes for biting on play action, where you take like a step or two toward your run fit, and then it's actually like a drilled footwork to put a plant foot in the ground, drive off of it, and then start a back pedal so that you can actually get depth into your and like start a zone drop really efficiently, and you're only using a couple steps on the run fit. And roboting is a really good technique thing to do, because look, the run develops faster than the pass, right? Like pass plays take time to develop, run plays are instantly you're on each other. So those first two steps are way more important to the run than the pass. So you can dedicate those first two steps to the run while still not dealing with still not issuing the pass coverage too much. But when you don't have a safety very close over the top of you, and there's 20 yards of grass between you and him, there's going to be all kinds of room for guys to run if you're widening that space as the linebacker as well. So now you can't do that. Now you just have to read, run, or pass, and you have to just hope you're right. And you have to start guessing, and that's a big problem. And so the ripple like goes on and on and on, right? And so if you've noticed, the Vikings give up a lot of production over the middle of the field. A lot of that is Cam Bynum playing too deep, and the safety's not deepening with it. Now, sometimes the safeties will deepen with it, and then you'll go, why on earth is nobody contesting that 8-yard stick route they just threw on 1st and 10? Well, because if they didn't do it the way they were doing it, it'd be a 20-yard route, right? That is the problem that we're in. And I'm going to go way more in depth on Cam Bynum another time, probably on Patreon. He had a pretty rough game against the Patriots, and I think it highlighted a lot of stuff that's been happening all year. That, I mean, it's not terrible. It's not benching or anything like that. But if we're looking for ways to become the kind of team that rattles off several wins in a row against good teams, like you have to do in the playoffs, then, that's the sort of stuff we need to find and optimize. But right now, it's all about spacing. The one layer of the defense is too shallow, the other one's too deep. There's too much space between it, and then you can hit stuff over the middle. And that really stinks, because that stuff doesn't take forever to develop, right? A 15-yard route, 15-yard in is not going to take forever to develop. You can still get the ball out reasonably quickly, and guys like Danielle Hunter are going to suffer on the stat sheet over that, right? Zadarius Smith got a lot of penetration against the Patriots, but he didn't actually end up getting all that much production off of that, not as much production as he deserved off of that, because there was a dude open over the middle of the field all the time, constantly, or because they were just like throwing at Duke Shelley, which will happen, or Shannon Sullivan, which will happen. That's one place I think that they could go, is just to tighten all of that stuff up. And what that means is requiring Cam Bynum to play more aggressively, to trust his reads a little more. And that might be a scary thing to do. That might, and maybe, if I went into the room and I said, hey, what about having Cam Bynum, backpedal a little bit less? Maybe they would all say, nah, he's not ready for that. And if that's the case, sure, okay, you just have a weak point on your defense. You got to just overcome it every game. That's how we live now. But I think where it's at is, if Bynum can learn when to stop backpedaling, how much cushion is enough cushion and how much cushion is too much cushion. Because right now he gives himself so much cushion that there's so much grass between him and where he has to be to make the play, that if it's like tipped over the other way, where he has to read the play really quickly to make the play. And the whole point of giving yourself cushion is so you don't have to read it as quickly. So he's almost undermining his own thing. That's one of the defensive things that I think that they can do. I also think that they can be a little bit more exotic with pressures. Like, it's time. they've done enough. All right. Another really interesting thing: the Vikings want to be more single high. They want to run their like cover 9, which is their term for cover 3 with the weak safety playing underneath. They want to go to that more. And I think they were starting to after the bye, but then Cam Dantzler got hurt and they kind of had to shift back into kind of low gear defensively to protect that corner a little bit more. And you can't protect them all day. Like, Duke Shelley still ended up one-on-one a bunch. So it's like, it sucks. But I think they want to start running their cover 1 where they can get interesting robbers and interesting rotations and interesting pressure packages out of that. That's where I think they want to be next. And then this whole too deep of a safety thing becomes way less of an issue because the rules are way different when you're in single high structures. I also want to talk a little about the offense, although obviously I'm much happier with it. So we will get into the offense and some of the things I think that they can do to optimize and become that kind of juggernaut unit. But first, let me talk to you about Prize Picks. It's daily fantasy made easy. Look, I don't like daily fantasy that much usually. I don't like doing the like classic get a lineup, enter a pool of 10,000 people, hope you get lucky kind of thing. Like, that's just not really my game. Like, it's not a fun game. I would rather just have a few players and say, like, here's my takes. And that is what Prize Picks can do. It's just you versus the house. If you beat the projection, there it is. You win. Congratulations. Prize Picks has all of their projections for all sorts of players all over. And it's not just football. It's basketball. It's hockey. It's soccer. It's everything. So head on over to prizepicks.com. And like I said at the beginning of the show, first-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. Moving on to the offense. I think the offense is in a pretty good spot right now. Coming off of that Patriots game, that was a big challenge for them. That Patriots defense is good. Even though they were missing a couple of people, and I think they had somebody go out of the game too, that Patriots defense is good. And part of it was that the Vikings could really, they were running on the Patriots just well enough. They were getting like 4 a pop, and that's what you want. You could do 4 yards, 4 yards, 4 yards, first down. Like that's enough. That'll work. But also because then that was setting up their play actions, and that stuff was really good. Kirk and Justin Jefferson on heck of a wavelength. I've been saying that since training camp. TJ Hawkinson had, I thought, a really nice game, both as a receiver, but especially as a blocker. There's a lot of stuff going right on the offense. But a lot of people have asked me about screens, and that's definitely something, because a Shanahan McVay playbook without screens is definitely like missing a leg. It's like a table that wobbles, it is not right, or a table with like a loose leg that can't support any weight anymore. It's like this. You can't put a vase on that corner. It's not really functioning as well as a table should. It's just incomplete. and you got to fix the screen. You can't just abandon screens. Now there are some screens that they ran that I thought were stupid as heck. I don't know. I didn't like the design of the four linemen running all the way down screen with what I believe Adam Thielen was supposed to come back to the ball, and it was supposed to be like a really crazy tunnel screen. That takes forever to develop, and that is the primary issue with the screens. They take too long. And if I were to nitpick the offense as a whole, that's what I would say. I would say that the offense takes too long to develop things. The timings are a little bit off. This is a chemistry thing, and we are talking fractions of a second here. But when you have, say, a 5-step drop back and you've got a route that's supposed to break off at the top of the drop, that route will be like 2 steps behind where it's supposed to be. And again, fractions of seconds, but that's, game of inches, right? That's all it takes for a throw to be pressured or for Cousins to have to bail out. And so I think that's not something you fix in the middle of the season. Like, that's something I hope gets better after another training camp and everybody works together. It's especially bad with DJ Hawkinson, who's, only been here for half a second. But tightening up those depths and adjusting that stuff could be really fruitful. And it could be just as simple as saying, hey, that 15-yard in is 2 steps late every time. Let's start calling it a 13-yard in. And when we ask you to do this, is 13 yards now. Let's make that adjustment. It can be as simple as that, or it can just be as simple as drilling it. You can just say, hey, this 15-yard in is 2 steps late every single time. Let's just drill it. Let's just drill this over and over and over and figure out what you have to do. If you have to do a speed cut for it instead, we're just going to do that. That's fine. But it's also, sometimes it's early. Sometimes the route is breaking and Cousins hasn't even turned around off the play action fake yet. Those timings, when they're really precise, is a thing of beauty. You want to talk about the Patriots, old Patriots Brady offenses. Those timings were impeccable. I mean, that it was ballet. It was so perfectly rhythmic that it was impossible to defend because the ball would be out quick, so you can't get any pressure, and the ball would be on the receiver the second his route breaks. So unless you were psychic and you predicted it, you couldn't stop them from getting 7 yards every single play. And those offenses just like dunked down the field. Brady lived on that forever, on just being really tight. And so tightening all that stuff up is really important. And there is no better example than the screens. The screens just need to tighten. Guys just take too long to do it. The thing about a screen is that defenses are always aware that it could be a screen. And the second any single player gives up a tell that it's a screen, the second one guy starts moving out, the clock has started. And that clock is very short. And the defense is going to see that guy. They're going to start reacting to the screen. They're going to start breaking over to that spot. And now guys have to make their blocks. I think I have seen a screen that's been about everyone's fault so far. I've seen one with Madison getting out too slow, Dalvin Cook getting out too slow. I've seen tight ends drop them. I've seen linemen whiff blocks. I've seen linemen late to peel off of their pass pro assignment to get out to screen block. I've seen Cousins wait too long and backpedal too long to throw, even though the screen was set up. I've seen him put too much air under it. I've seen him I've seen like every single thing that could go wrong with a screen has happened this year to the Vikings. And I think it's just got to be something that they emphasize. But that's one of those ways that they can be the kind of team that rattles off huge win streaks, or more huge win streaks. They already had a 7-gamer in this season, but you got to do more of that. So again, tomorrow, Twitter Tuesday, get your questions in. LockedOnVikingsPodcast@gmail.com. Google form in the show notes. Find me on Twitter. Leave a YouTube comment. All that good stuff. I will see you all tomorrow. Wednesday we'll do film, and then Thursday we're on a Jets mode. So I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.